questions?
How do you recognize your own frequency? How does each of us individuals come to recognize it?
That's a good
We have all
question.
the other stuff,
Recognize what? Sorry.
our own frequency, our own essence,
Okay.
with all the other stuff in our lives.
It kind of depends on the person. So some people need help in that unraveling because their mechanisms have become so much a part of who they think they are, they have a hard time seeing past those filters. So you can either have somebody help unravel that for you, or usually a group of friends or people that know you well can also then see who you are. I mean, a lot of this is hard to do fully as a self-exercise because of those masking features. But as a self thing, the first thing I do is find a place in nature and ground in and ground up and then let everything go. And that's the meditation aspect, is once you've gotten all the mechanisms to quiet and there's no longer any charge, those mechanisms kind of go into a silent orbit. Then you can kind of drop into the self. I mean, I drop in through my heart because but not everybody has a heart that's contained enough to drop into. But that is the center point where I can find a frequency. And then, it kind of depends on how good your channels are up and down. Some people can drop into then the Godhead and they feel, oh, well, I'm God, and I'm all the consciousness of the planet and all that stuff, at least for that moment. And then you have to then pull out a little bit to find, well, what frequency of that is mine? Because you get lost in the oldness of everything. And once again, you're not creating reality here, you're floating up into the Godhead. So the nature aspect, I think, is very important, where you have clarity from other people's realities. Because a lot of people are also empaths and don't realize it, or intuitives, and translating other people's garbage all the time. So that's what their childhoods were about, and etc. But also, if you find someone that can help you hold space so that you can unravel some of those mechanisms. Because a lot of it is holding emotional space where the mechanisms feel safe. And that can be with people you care about, or that can be with professionals. And, I'm just saying things that I know, but I know there's a lot, like meditation, and there's a lot of other exercises that help people find a still point where they can find themselves. What I've found not as useful about a lot of these things is if you're taking somebody else's way of doing something and making it yours, you're taking part of their reality. And so you never quite find yours. You're always following somebody else's.
Adding to your confusion.
Exactly. So I've come to the point that if it's not me, then I can't express that. So when I work with people now and ask them what I do, I don't have a word for them. I'm just me, and I found that I can mirror to other people them, and that helps them. So there you go. I think everybody's that way, though. Once somebody's in their frequency, it doesn't matter what they think they're doing. They being themselves, even if it's only that encapsulated space of a therapeutic session, then mirrors to the other person what it's like to be yourself, and then they can then go through those layers, or the other person can help step them through those layers. You know what I mean, healing is usually about either having a complete emotional space for people that can just give you a hug and then that's it, because their emotional space is so filled with light that then yours reflects it and you find your own. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, all of these modalities, to me, are only getting close enough to a purity of a frequency, but then you're reflecting it to the other person, or a purity of emotional space and you're reflecting it to the other person. I don't think those two things are different, but we separated in our language. think they're the same. That was my long answer to your question.
What exactly do you mean by co-create? Who are we creating with and what are we creating? Are you talking on a material, physical sense, an emotional sense? Are we creating with a God sense? What do you mean by co-create?
Once again, that could be a complicated answer. So we are co-creating personally. In other words, well, drug use really helps for people to understand that concept, because you can completely change and warp reality and then recreate it back in different ways, depending on your abilities in that realm. Yeah. I mean, what it does is it opens up certain pineal functions. But back to something where we're creating this whole thing is co-created by collective consciousness, right? And you can step out of it and be in your own reality, but you're assuming that reality is going to be there when you check back in. So you have a co-creation eddy, I like to call it. So I could not watch the news and not know that there's elections going on or anything. I could live on my little farm out in the country and think that all there is trees and sunlight and flowers, and that's great. But because I've been involved in a creation that involved the complexities of our society, as soon as I tune back in, I start re-co-creating that space, so it'll be there for me when I check in with my neighbors or turn on my TV. So on a pure physics level, that's the way it works. If you step it off a little bit from pure physics, we are programmed to input what we think is going to happen. And so as you go into co-creation, what you're doing is you're taking the program out, so there's more opportunities to have something completely unexpected happen every time. And then you can input how that unexpected might manifest. And it's a slow process. And there's a lot of books about how you create manifest wealth and all this other stuff. But you get to the point then where you're realizing that my little green frequency here, or yellow, or whatever we want to pick, is connected to sunlight, or the light of all that is, let's say. And if I don't make that division, if I don't split it through that prism of who I think I am, I'm everything, right? And being everything, I'm responsible for all the creation here. And as you go into that level of dimensionality where you actually can hold both consciousness at the same time, then you can start co-creating things. Now, I mean, I could explain all the physical barriers we have in place, but what we have is we have limiters within our minds because we want this to be a solid physical environment and we want a particular evolutionary thing to occur. And what I was saying earlier about chaos starting to occur is those limiters are going away. And as we're more and more responsible for actually making this real, people start getting more and more crazy because what has been an automatic function, they're having to take responsibility for. And that's causing their minds to have to live in these two other realms. And a lot of people then feel spun out of control because there's too much for them to input. And the reason that is their emotional bodies aren't healed to a space where they feel what they want, and that is then reality.
So could you be saying that the individual never really creates everything is co-creation? There really is only co-creation.
It really is only co-creation. But individual consciousness, as we define it here, they basically, people incarnate and they sever knowing intentionally because they want their particular view only. And so, this is the example of, let's say you want to know what a forest is. So if you're one person, the best you could do is see the whole forest and there's big trees and stuff. But if you really want to know a forest, you're going to have to split up and find out, oh, there's bushes and berries. And if you really want to know what a forest is, you have to go down to the there's bacteria and there's all this stuff. Oh my God, it's so complex. So that's the way I see, spirit here is how do you know all of an experience? You have to split into small enough defined intents to know all those little tiny microprocesses. And there's consciousness that loves that. I'm going to incarnate here and all I'm going to study is how to make a circuit board or whatever. I mean, that's, But then there's consciousness that wants to see the big picture. And so they become philosophers and, whatever. They can see how it's all wrapped together. So we are all, I'm trying to define something linearly that isn't, of course. Because unless you've had the experience of being part of everything, it's hard to show how then you define from here to there. But we're all part of it. So every single person, how you bow to the God and everyone, right? But until you've been the God, you don't realize why they're bowing to you or why you're bowing to the other person. But once you are in that state, then you can reflect that state to the other person, right? You're honoring that here's God right there. Whoa. They're all over the place. That's what I mean by co-creation is we are God. So when we're co-creating, we are co-creating, but as a uniform consciousness. There's not another consciousness out there doing it for us. It is us. But we're causing ourselves to have amnesia to separate that into specific bandwidths of experience so that we have a more fuller experience of what it means. So it's not a crippling, it's a more fuller experience. The diversification can give you knowings you can't have as a large mass of consciousness. How was that for you?
I have a question.
Yes.
Would you say it's similar to our understanding of just the individual, the conscious and the subconscious? There's this huge iceberg of subconscious action going on, processing, but we are just this tip of consciousness in the physical.
True.
Is
Yes.
okay. All right.
But I think it's time for that knowing to be able to find those tips. Because I think we're in a place now where, here's my view. If you get so isolated away and individualized away from source, that you start creating a closed reality structure. It's self-feeding. Consciousness is feeding itself. This is reality, and it makes it more and more defined and defined and defined, and it gets hard and rigid. We're not flying anymore. We don't have fairies anymore. We don't have magic anymore. We've lost all these legendary realities that used to be here.
We have?
Well,
Don't tell me that.
we haven't lost them, but
No.
our ability to see them, because they're still here. I mean, I could see them if I want to. I could probably make all of you to see them, but it'd be a lot of work. But as it crunches in, you need to have source, or the bottom of the iceberg, come back through and break that shell back open. I think that's where we're at.
But isn't that part of the co-creation?
It is.
Too? I'm not
But if we
saying-
don't find our individual frequencies, all we're doing is recreating the shells.
I'd like to have you redefine your words. See, part of your problem, exactly what he's talking about, is that we have an unconscious working against us, don't we?
Mhm.
You made that. That's one of the layers that keeps you from understanding that the unconscious, there is no unconscious. There is a superconscious. Yes, you can define that and reach up into that. But what is unconscious? It's not conscious, so it doesn't exist. And we define that into our lives in the methodology he's talking about of co-creation. What did we just do? We just co-created a dead-end street.
sometimes the unconscious is referred to thoughts, patterns that are there in the conscious, but just hundreds of miles deep.
Subconscious.
They're out of
Another-
phase.
Subconscious.
They're out of phase with
Yeah.
your consciousness, you know, so why call them unconscious? You're just giving them a negative aspect,
Oh, okay.
right?
Yes.
They are probably, and they are, superconscious. When you get to zero, which is what he's talking about, going into frequency, I call it get to zero. You're not adding and subtracting, you're just being yourself. Well, all of a sudden, then, you are touching the one.
And an interesting point that brings up is there is a certain amount of, once something has been defined a certain way, until it's undefined, you can't, it's not able to reutilize its,
It's not at its frequency, so you can't understand it.
exactly. And we have what I would call, and it's manifested physically, a waste problem on this earth, where a lot of essence has been defined in what is now a unconscious, environment. And until that moves back into our consciousness, where we can refine it into what I would call opportunities, probabilities, and we'll either feel we're heading down or we'll feel we're heading up. So a lot of people feel they're heading down because they're associating their consciousness with all the consciousness that has gone unconscious to then be recycled, so to speak. And not with consciousness that's recycling that into new reality.
And so forth.
And there has to be, there's the emotional experience of loss and grief and anger and all those things is what recycles it, because it washes it clean. It makes it back into pure essence. Right now, it has been locked. I mean, in and itself is neutral, like you say, but there has not been the outpouring emotionally to clean. And once it's cleaned for ourselves, it's clean for the earth, and then we have a new earth. But there's a fear that we aren't going to have what it takes to clean, and therefore all that emotional baggage is going to drown the light, and we're all going to go down. Because here's what happens. If emotion isn't open, light can't be received, it just bounces off. So as emotion gets closed off and unprocessed, the light can no longer support the emotion because it has an outer wounding, it has defense mechanisms. You can't accept true unconditional love because your heart's closed off. Same with what's going on the planetary scale. And so there's a fear, we won't be able to fix it. We can't move enough emotion, I can't heal myself enough, I can't heal the planet enough to have a new sunrise of infinite possibility and beauty and new planet. It's too late. So knowing that undercurrent is there, just to deny it and then try to move on hasn't been successful. But knowing that's there, the real work then is, like I said, about clearing the emotional body, so open enough to allow a little bit of new understanding in. You don't got to fix all of it at once. But back to how do you start? Anytime you get a trigger, if it's possible, these are all non-guilt things, because guilt is always your enemy. So get rid of guilt first thing. But if it's possible, when you're feeling triggered, step into the emotion to find out what it is, and just try to bring as little tiny bit of love and understanding as possible to it. And then if that's all you can take, it's too much, and you have to go drink some Jack Daniels, that's fine, no big deal. But
Pushing it down.
you've got a little bit in there, and that opens up that space. It brings a little bit of light in. And as you do that, then it gets reflected in the world. And then you start hearing things about, oh, well, they figured out a way to solve this problem. They're creating these great farms now. And, because all of a sudden the world is going to change that dramatically. But the weird amnesia thing we have is we won't remember that it was bad before. Because we constantly are jumping realities. And unless you can see how we've jumped them, it seems like we've always just the same reality. But I mean, I've gone so far that some of them I have a really hard time finding. Like somebody said, remember in your childhood? I'm like, how many thousand dimensions over was that? Because we've been jumping probabilities, and we're all jumping probabilities. And what holds those probabilities together are the emotional connection points. Unfortunately, most of them are negative now, so we're recreating negative dimensional probabilities. But as they become loving, as they become balanced emotionally, or even just slightly open, they become slightly more positive. And once again, it's not a miraculous thing, unfortunately. For some people it might be, because they have a frequency that's such that it will instantly change everything within them. For other people, just because where you happen to be on the frequency, not good or bad or anything like that, your purpose is incremental. Little tiny gain, little tiny loss. But that is a depth of healing that is needed on some levels, where instantaneous is not useful. I'm going to jump into something else here, because if you don't spend the time to heal it completely, then you can go past it and go past what you can encompass. Have experiences that are too unsettling for that frequency to handle. And then you start splitting. And that's what happens to children that have extremely traumatic events. They have an experience they can no longer process or handle. And they have to split from it, and they have amnesia of it.